Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 77.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards. On today's episode, it's myself and Dr. Creashow, and we are actually talking about something that recently happened that did grow my practice 10% in 14 days. In fact, it's a little bit more now, closer to 15% in terms of visits per week in 20 days, 21 days. And so I think you'll really get a lot out of this episode and some of the chaos and some of the changes that happened out of necessity and how that actually created a huge spark in the practice. It's something that you can actually do and something I advise that you do. And we talk through it on today's episode, as well as a handful of other things that I know you'll find valuable as well. Great opportunity, guys, that I want to share with you, something that everybody who is looking at maybe joining as an associate, looking for mentorship, looking for leadership in terms of how to grow a practice themselves, be a part of something that really is exceptional and extraordinary. And that's Dr. Mike. Mike is now bringing on a new associate in his practice, so he's taking associate applications. You can reach out to him, Mike at lifebydesign.com. Let him know you're interested, and he'll take it from there. So enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors.
Appreciate it. Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. As always, I'm super happy. I'm super thrilled, and I'm super humbled. Awesome. Great to have you back on the show. We've got a great episode today. How I grew my practice 10%, no word of a lie, in 14 days. So we're gonna do this.
Not just a good headline.
It's not just a good headline. That would be completely, we wouldn't want to give you clickbait like that. It would be dishonest. It's actually true. And I think the reason I wanted to do the show about this today, because it encompasses a lot of different things that happened that led to the change that boosted our practice 10% in 14 days. In fact, it was less than 14 days, and now it's actually more than 10%. So I'll share that with you as we go through the show. But let's talk a little bit about how we actually got there, and then we'll key in on specifically what that change was, how we implemented that change, and why it actually changed our practice so drastically in such a short period of time. So, Creashow, as you know, lots going on here at the Life by Design Center. Lots going on. We've recently opened Charlie's Cafe, and all in a couple week span, we opened Charlie's Cafe, which is a full-on, basically healthy Starbucks with better coffee, which we should actually talk about that as an interesting side note. Do you remember, how a bunch of Starbucks fanboys we've been for such a long time?
If I could just comment on that, I don't think I've ever really been that big of a Starbucks fanboy. I just like the fact that I can get a decent coffee pretty much anywhere in the world consistently. If I'm anywhere that has better coffee, I'm super excited. But
sure, I'm totally calling bullshit on you though, because you and I were fanboys. You can't say anything different. We've got it recorded on this podcast many, many times. You've accepted many, many cups from Starbucks, and when we were in New Zealand, it wasn't of their coffee we were looking for. We were looking for Starbucks. And so my point is that trip to New Zealand really kind of morphed, I think, the way we looked at coffee and getting exposed to different coffees. And the long of the short of it is, honestly, I can't actually drink Starbucks anymore. I tried numerous times, and I'm not just biased because of the coffee that we make in our coffee shop, cafe, but it's honestly, I can't taste it. I can't do it. And that's really disappointing, because I used to think it was so amazing and spent so much of my life at Starbucks drinking Starbucks coffee. But I guess the flip side of that, the positive, is now we're able to produce wonderful coffee, and that's the next project we've been taking on, is this full-on cafe. Almost, Dana would always say, you can't call it a restaurant. We're not serving food, but I guess you could call it a restaurant because we're serving lunch there, and we do have meals throughout the day. So basically, we've opened a restaurant.
Make sure CRA doesn't know it's a restaurant.
No, right? No. My WSIB is based on restaurant. So,
okay. So we can call it a restaurant.
It's a restaurant. It's legit.
Yeah.
And we're running that with 7 staff. It's open 7 to 7, 6 days a week, in addition to the corrective care office, in addition to the Underground Fit Club, and in addition to Life by Design. So all that's more than enough to keep people busy, to keep me busy, that's for sure, throwing 2 little kids and a wife and all the other stuff that goes on. And then in the same week as opening it, I made the decision to let my staff go. My staff of 3 years, probably the best staff member really that I've ever had in terms of productivity from that perspective. Yep. And all of that could have completely crushed me. And there's been moments for sure, and there's been days for sure where it feels like it is. and there's still a lot of recovery happening, trying to catch up. Today is Friday as we record this, and I finished practice last night. Left for home about 11, and woke up this morning at 3:30. So that kind of gives you any clue to what it's been like over the last little bit. And anyway, long of the short of it is changing staff in that time was extremely stressful, very difficult decision, which we can talk about today. And all of that, somebody asked me today on one of our coaching calls, so, has your practice taken a big drop because of the time and energy away and focused on other things? And actually it's gone the opposite way. It's actually grown 10 and now 15% in the last 14, now 21 days since I came up with this headline. So that's where we're at, Horatio. That's what we're going to talk about today. And what do you think? Where should we start?
Well, first of all, I think I was going to start with, I think 10% growth, over like months or a year is good growth for your practice, right? I know when we do chiro math, right, we tend to think like if the year goes by and we haven't doubled our practice at least, then somehow we're doing something wrong. Right. But in the business world, in the real world, if you're increasing by 10%, that's pretty good, man. Like that's really solid.
Especially when you have a business that's been happening for a period of time, right? I know when we first started practice, I was always growing at about 25 to 30% per year for the first 5, 6, 7 years. And then you hit a point where that growth really starts to slow. You start reaching your capacities, both in terms of the number of visits you can see, the energy you have. There's bottlenecks with systems and staff and so on. So, I think 10% growth from year to year, especially many years into practice, would be great. And so the fact that we saw that in 14 days is, shocking to say the least. I was actually going to be happy if we changed staff and just kind of stayed around the same for a few months while we tried to get everything reoriented and reintegrated.
So why don't you let the cat out of the bag? And talk about what actually happened to increase the growth, because it really comes down to like one piece of the practice, but one thing in particular.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I realized, and as much as again this staff member did a great job for us on so many levels, many years in, if you're not auditing what's happening in your practice, and you're just assuming that the systems that you've implemented, and even the systems that you're consistently training on, are staying the same, or they're being carried out the way that you expect them to, then I think you are in for a rude awakening. Even in the best staff, things change, people modify things, people try and find their own shortcuts, things that maybe they think are going to be better. And in some cases they probably are. In some cases they're not equipped to make that type of decision, and things start to get modified. And that's what happened in our practice, specifically some of the recall systems, some of the tracking systems, things that we had put in place, things that I actually train my coaching clients on, weren't getting done in my own practice. And so when we made the change in the training of our new team member, I was going through and essentially started to audit every single system. I pared back a bunch of things. I got rid of forms and files that were being used, things I'd never even seen before, honestly, and went back really to the core of what it is that we teach at Life by Design for chiropractors. I wish I could say what we teach is what was happening in my practice, but in that instance, it wasn't happening in my practice. And so when we implemented it, very specifically, the idea of holding people accountable. And you've heard me talk about this numerous times on the podcast. The job of your team is to hold people accountable. The job of the doctor is to create agreements to hold them accountable too, at least on a 80-20 and then flip it on a 20-80, where the doctor makes 80% of the agreements, the staff does 80% of the accountability, and then 20% for each of the other. You make that agreement, and the staff knows you make that agreement for the sole purpose that they can feel confident in holding people accountable to that agreement to get the results they've come and they've paid you for. And in our case, that wasn't fully happening. Not to say that people weren't getting called back or touched on. There was still contact, but it might have been a few days later. It might have been a week later. It might have been, I don't want to bother that person, or I'll shoot them an email. And, as we train the new staff, it was a clear instruction to make sure everybody on our safety net was scheduled or touched base or contacted. that every single person in our practice had a start date, end date, an examination date, or at least an examination alert to be triggered at some point in their process. And when we did that, over a 2-week period, we increased our practice volume by 10%. And now it's actually gone up quite a bit more than 10%. It's almost been, probably, I guess, close to 20% prep for this week. So there's almost from 2 weeks ago to the week coming up, we are pre-scheduled for nearly 50 more visits than we had 2 weeks ago. Mind-blowing. But it's not like we've had 20 new people. We've had our normal, 2 to 5 new people in the week, same as we typically regularly would. The only difference was having our staff take on a relentless conviction for scheduling people, because it's their responsibility to hold people accountable to the agreements that we make with them. So I was blown away by it. It really opened my eyes to the importance of that. And it's definitely been a conversation piece for a lot of our coaching clients over the last 2 weeks, as you can imagine, to get that audited and up to speed in their practices. But I'll tell you, it was a real eye-opener, Cratio.
Sure. So, there's a couple of really interesting things that, that you said there. I think with chiropractors, and myself included in this, when it comes to things like a system, for example, I think it's important to audit all the systems. I think we neglect that we're constantly changing year in and year out. And 3 years, Jamie, that's a long time. Like, you might not think that you've changed, but there's been lots of dynamics. Like Francois and Zoe are now in your practice, and they have, they're different people than you are. So I think it's always important to be auditing to make sure that what it is that we're actually doing is authentic to the doctors that we want to be, right? This is something that is good for us.
Well, I think one of the tools, guys, that you can use, and I'll put this in as a freebie for you since Cratio just brought this up, is the Extraordinary Chiropractor Report Card. That's something that we use in our practice on a 90-day basis, and it's something that you can use to audit the top 40 things your practice needs, 10 in each area: leadership, systems, team, and communication. And it's a great, great tool. So I'll put that in there for you guys to grab and download for free. And you can check that out and start using that. And you can do exactly like Cratio said. You can actually audit it and see what you have in place and what you don't have in place. Now, I think it leads us to the next conversation, which is about team development and staff and training. So there's a few pieces to this conversation, Cratio. Number one, on the front end, I think it reminds us that although, when you're hiring staff, it is important to have the right person in place, to have a system, a hiring system where you can hopefully uncover the right people who have a similar value system to you. Also knowing that, things aren't right in the probation period to go ahead and make a change. Now, in our case, that wasn't the situation. This was an extremely productive staff member, but I think all along, part of me knew that there was a mismatch in values, but, I saw an opportunity here to have somebody who was super highly productive. And, we've talked before about values over opportunities, and it always does come back to at least affect you in some way, shape, or form. This wasn't a major negative effect, but enough that, we made the decision at such a pivotal time when there was a lot of stuff going on, not because this person wasn't performing well. And I think this is the important point here. I wanted to be ahead of the curve. And that's a very key concept. You teach it to people basically with their health, is they should be making changes to their health, working towards meeting the requirements in advance of hitting a crisis. And hiring staff is the same. I think a lot of us are afraid to make changes in staff. Hey, everything's going okay. We're growing. There has to be a mindset around optimization, not just for your practice members and their health, but I think a mindset for optimization in your practice where you're, again, relentless about everything being optimal. And if you see a situation where a person or a system or a tool or something in your infrastructure isn't optimal, even though it might be fine, and you don't think it's going to change, then you need to make a more wholesale change and be ahead of the curve. Because if you don't, you're going to wait, there's going to be a crisis, and then you're really going to be behind the 8 ball when you try and make that switch.
Yeah, I think, this definitely applies to me. It's tough to let people go, and I think and it sucks having the same conversation with the same staff person over and over again. I think what would be really helpful is to develop we have the hiring blueprint. It would be really cool to develop a firing blueprint, about how to go about letting, and not like in this horribly aggressive, mean way, but we're different. time to move on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, if you've ever broken up with somebody, that's essentially what it is, It's that conversation, but, applied to hiring and firing. And, I think the place to start there, at least in that blueprint, if we ever get around to doing it, is really the mindset. And this is what I had to work through for myself was, recognizing, and there's so much in this conversation, especially when we've talked in the past about Atlas Shrugged, and it's come up so much lately, some of the principles in Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead and some of Ayn Rand's work with objectivism. And, this idea that, I'm not their keeper, right? I'm not their banker. I'm not their babysitter. I'm not their whatever it is. And as much as you're right, it's uncomfortable. What I realize is that it may be uncomfortable to let this person go, but because it's not my responsibility to manage their life, if I don't let them go, then I'm actually sacrificing myself. And that was really the take home for me when I went through the thought process and was contemplating what to do versus, letting them go, not letting them go. And I realized that if I didn't, that it was a self-sacrifice, and that just really wasn't okay, and I wasn't going to be able to live with that.
Well, not only that, I mean, you can even apply it to the other person. Once you take that attitude that this is somehow a loss for me, right, that is going to negatively affect everyone. That once somebody starts losing, everybody starts losing, right? Like, let's be clear on how business relationships work, right? Like, if you're the person who's responsible, and let's be clear who the head of the company is, it's you, right? So if your needs aren't being fulfilled, there's no possible way that you can be the best for the people coming in, the people that are giving you money, and even your staff.
No,
so it just negatively impacts everybody.
Right. A conversation I had today on the call was, whether it be with associates or staff, hopefully this is the case, but you as the CEO, you are the gold standard, right? You are the person that hopefully other people in your business are aspiring to work towards, in sense, at least in terms of work ethic and expectations. If you're a doctor, then around communication or, the other things that you're doing and eliciting in your practice. And if you're not, then obviously that's its own issue and its own problem. But, trying to find team members who are willing to work towards that process, getting them hired. And then, like you said, if it's not right early on or right away, let them go sooner than later. And then making sure that you have a training system in place. You asked me the question, did they understand what the recall system was?
Of course,
that's an important question, right? And in our case, they did. We've talked about it numerous times. It's something we've trained on. It's something that, it's always been explicit. But if not, then of course training is the bottleneck or the deficiency. If you do communicate it, then really the big thing is making sure that this person has the knowledge and the conviction to follow through and help hold people accountable. Because I think, in our case and lots of other cases, that's really where it comes down to is, do they have the value system and the conviction to hold people accountable to what it is that you've defined as the gold standard for your practice, what it is that you've defined as the important parts for your practice? And so, that's really the key. And that's not easy to create. And that's where, hiring on the front end is really important, because if someone doesn't have the same values or they're not developing, the conviction around corrective care, your approach to chiropractic, then they're probably not going to feel comfortable telling somebody that, hey, we missed you yesterday, we've got you scheduled in today, or hey, we're 2 visits off track, we really want to get the top or the best benefits we can get here.
Yeah, so basically, if we had to scale it down to the big pictures, and I'm just learning this now as I'm going along, but if something's not getting done the way that you want it usually comes down to a handful of things, right? Number one is that the values are different, like you already mentioned. Number two, the CA lacks the clarity of your vision, right? You haven't explained why these things are important for these people, why it's important that they make their checkups, why it's important that they keep a schedule, why these things are important, or like you've already alluded to as well, is they're not trained properly. So it's gotta be something along those lines, right? So if you're struggling, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, well, the scheduling is good, but XYZ, my practice is struggling, try to put it through those 3 things as a filter, right? Either the values are off, either they don't understand your vision or what's expected of them. There's no clear role or no clear identification of what you want them to do, or you haven't trained them. They haven't run the reps and they're missing the vocabulary. They're missing, what happens if they say this? They're missing the strategy.
Yeah. No, I think you said a lot of really important things there, and it gives people a good stepwise process to think about, all right, do I have these systems in place? And I think that, the bigger picture here is this is just one system that we're talking about.
Right.
And so there's so many different systems in your business and in your practice. And this one system and getting one system up to speed, and it's not like it was terrible, but getting it up to speed can boost the practice 10% or 15% or 20% in such a short period of time without seeing a major bump in new patients. What does that say about getting all the systems up to speed? There's a ton of value in that process. And, we try and do that on a 90-day cycle and really continue to audit everything over and over and over again, no matter how many years we are in practice. And I mean, we're a great example where some things still got missed. Now imagine if I wasn't doing any auditing, right? What other things would be missed? And in auditing the whole practice, there was only one or two things, and these were the areas that needed to be fixed, thankfully. And, we're spending all this time and energy, let's say, on things like, Facebook ads. And again, this is not to say you shouldn't be doing this, or, running some kind of marketing campaign, all wonderful stuff. But are we spending enough time working on our business, right? Are we spending enough time working through our systems and our communication strategies? Or what I see in most clients and most docs who I speak to is they've got something in place. They're fine with it. It's doing an okay job, but they don't see the value in continuing to train on it over and over and over again.
Yeah, so just to add to your point, repeat business is the number one reason, people stop doing business with you because they just forgot. Right? This is like Dan Kennedy's number one gold thing. The reason that they stop, the reason they forget or the reason they don't come for their appointments isn't because you've done something wrong, isn't because they dislike you. They just forgot.
Right.
And if you don't remind them and keep them on track, they're going to forget. Right? Because we love chiropractic and we love their health, but I don't know if you've met people. For most people, unfortunately, their health and their chiropractic checkups are not the most important part of their life. They understand the value of it, but there's other things that come up. So it's paramount, right, that the back end is taken care of before you start running Facebook ads and marketing. And this is coming from someone who loves marketing.
Right. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think when you're starting in a business or when we're digging into a business, I think there's a baseline number of new patients that you need to at least open your doors and not lose your mind. But a large part of your energy in the front end really needs to go into building out that infrastructure and making sure you've got a solid infrastructure in place so you're not putting time and energy and dropping 20, 40. I mean, I did a consultation recently and the doc, and he understood this, and he was clear on why he called us, but, 40, 50, 60 new patients a month ratio. And, saw a bump in practice in terms of practice numbers for sure, but then coming back down when you don't have that 1 month. And so, new patients are great. New patients are definitely part of the lifeblood of a good practice, but again, to come back to a constant theme here is the retention-based practice is really the practice of today. It's the one that is going to be less stress, more profit.
That's more fun.
More fun. I can't even imagine processing 60 new patients, let alone, the fallout from, how many of them are not going to be accepted into the practice or going to be accepted in a way where you're not going to be, really stoked about taking care of them, or they're not going to be super engaged. So I think the overall theme here, guys, is, there's a lot of holes in your practice currently. Hopefully you don't have to go through a crisis like us to figure out where they are. If you get into a cycle where you're looking at things on a regular basis, use the report card that we gave you. Check it out. Go in, audit yourself, see where you're at. Let me know what your scores are. I'd love to hear about it. And where's your greatest deficiency? Where's the work need to be? Where's the bottleneck? And start to work on that stuff. It might be in marketing. You might have great systems, internal processes, great conversion, and awesome retention, and it's simply marketing. That was our problem for a long time. Or it could be flipped. You could have people showing up at your door, but you don't know what the heck to do with them, or how to position yourself properly, or how to keep them in your practice, or how to get them to tell other people or be inspired in the process. If that's the problem, then obviously you got to learn how to do that. And there's untapped potential in your current practice already. That's the point. You might want practice growth. A large portion of your practice growth is already sitting right there in front of you. You're already probably on a gold mine of patients and patients who've left you, who've done business with you, who want to do business with you again, and it's digging into your systems to make sure you're, one, hopefully positioning yourself, keeping them, but worst case scenario, finding a way to bring them back or at least stay in touch with them. Cratio, anything you want to add to today's episode?
No, that's a really great cap on the thing. You know, it's less sexy. Like doing the back end stuff is always less sexy. But it's really where great businesses are made, right? Like it's this idea of the tribe and keeping people who are really devoted and passionate about what it is that you're doing. And I mean, I look at my practice and everything's great and I'm super happy and we're growing. But if even 60% of the people that came through my door were still there, I would have 3 clinics all jammed with like thousands of visits a week. So
correct. Yeah.
Right.
Even in a great retention-based practice with low turnover and, very few inactivations, if you've got any reasonable amount of new cases, if you were keeping everybody, then you're right. You wouldn't be able to handle it. So, I've seen some of the average practices with thousands and thousands of new patients over their life cycle, and still seeing 150, 175, 200 visits a week. Reggie always said, go down in your basement, look at all the practice files, and ask yourself, where are these people and why are they not here anymore? And I think that's a eye opener. I know it was for me to think about that process, and that's something that sparked trying to build a strong retention-based practice as possible. So guys, go to the show notes. You can see the freebie in there, which is the Extraordinary Chiropractor Report Card. Check that out. Let us know how you like it. And as always, thank you so much for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.